exactly. So what happens is we begin to think through and try to come to an understanding ourselves about what's going on out there when people are obstructing, expressing emotion very strongly and in an entitled or blaming way, when people are polarized, when it's my way or your way or the highway, and there's no other way to seemingly get to dialogue, where there's this a sense, in this day and age of entitlement that also comes with timing, like deliver, 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 like the Amazon idea that Canada you were saying is a problem. And so what I'd like us to talk about tonight is, well, okay, so those are the potholes, those are the bumps on the road to resolution, whether it's resolution within a friendship, an intimate partnership, a working relationship, or a family, whether it's personal, that I'm engaged with conflict with someone, or it's me as the intervener, which is a role that many of us who are drawn to insight want to play. And so one of the things that I have been exploring for, I think it's 11 years now, I've been exploring curiosity. Now, this is not new to those of you who are looking at insight, but I want to talk a little bit about my journey there, because I am a lawyer. And it's hard to say I'm a lawyer without offering a modifying clause that says, but I'm a nice one, or I care, or like, oh, but I'm not like those stereotypical ones, or you'd really like me if you get to know me. And so many lawyers are afraid to just say the words. If someone asks you what you do for a living, I'm a lawyer. Hardly anyone can stop there. So we're at that whole, the labeling as well, where we see people through their role or through their, when we see their behaviors, and we attribute an entire world of our own assumptions and judgments to what that behavior means. And it's really hard to stay curious because we think we know the answer, especially the more experienced you get as a helping professional who is helping people solve problems. So I began this journey well before I ever met Cheryl Picard and began studying the insight approach to conflict. Okay, so and I just thought, oh, I find it very hard to be curious. And then I started noticing when I was judging or assuming, and I noticed that it was happening like all the time. And then within a couple of months, I began noticing my default to solutions and problem solving. And I want us to talk about tonight, what is that all about? And for those of you who have jobs as problem solvers, because many of us do, lawyers certainly could identify our role as being problem solvers. And yet all the descriptions that we've heard tonight about how people sometimes resist us, how sometimes they push away the help that we want to give, how their strong emotion can play such a damaging and destructive role in interpersonal communications, and how, depending on the role that we're asked to take on as intervener, conflict resolution person, or as advocate, lawyer or advocate in some other role, or as activist, because you want to make a difference. And if we're trying to embrace curiosity, how do we do that productively? Because we can't all just sit around and wonder, wow, like, because that isn't gonna get the job done. And so the reason we came up with this theme for today is that I find when I'm introducing the insight approach to the people that work in my field, which is mostly separation and divorce professionals, not just lawyers, mental health people, financial people, and legal people, but mostly we can easily recognize our default to problem solving. Give us a story and we'll begin figuring out what needs to happen next. Now, are we the only people that do that? Yeah. Look at a dilemma, hear a sad story. It's really hard to resist finding some way to make it better. So think of those times when, well, there's going to be two times. First, professionally or personally, think of a time when you were, I don't know, someone was expressing very strong resistance to the help you were trying to give. Okay? And think of a moment where you're like, I'm just trying to help, you know, like that one of those moments. I'm only trying to help. Oh my gosh. Can you think of a moment like that? So when people are resisting us, what do we tend to do?
Help harder.
I love that. Yeah, help harder. You know, we try to get, oh, maybe this person obviously just needs more information. So we might tell more, we might give more information. We might explain again. We might try to reassure them that we're really here to help if they would only let us, but, you know, sort of a pat on the head. Or we might give evidence of how we've been able to help in other situations, and produce exhibits and proofs that, in fact, yes, indeed, I am a helpful person. And for the most part, when someone's resisting us, what do we get? If we start telling them why they should let us help them, or we start reassuring them, don't worry, we can help, we often get more resistance. What the hell? And so the interesting thing here is there's something about it that totally fits with the insight approach, which is an escalating pattern of defending behaviors that we can experience personally without any setup at all. We don't even need to walk into the room and be the professional, because we're meeting resistance in lots of places, especially these days when people are really amped up with their level of their sense of threat. Their defensiveness can be so much stronger. So what I noticed when I was back in my curiosity experiment was that I had to actually go on a problem-solving holiday. I truly had to check out on problem solving, because I really began to see judgments. And sometimes the judgments were, it's not all judgy. Judgment is like making an assessment. Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong, but often we'll think that we're right. So that's why I'd call it a judgment. Or assumptions, where we're assuming something to be that may not be. So I was noticing my judgments and assumptions, but I was immediately trying to fix them. Like I wasn't able to just stay in the moment with it. So I was missing the boat for my own personal insight or transformation. And so the funny thing was, I then traveled back to British Columbia. It was the year that the ICP forum was in Vancouver, Kim. And so because I was there and I'd lived there for 13 years, I went to visit some friends, and I had a friend who had a problem. And she wanted to talk about it. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm on a problem solving holiday. I can't do that. I made a commitment. I can't help you. And I'm like, I did it because I was giving a workshop like 2 days later on curiosity. And I'm like, I can't let down now. You may need help, but you're gonna have to hire someone. And so the funny thing was, I learned again, like we get drawn into it. We judge ourselves for going to problem solving, or am I the only one? Like, then we're like, oh shit, we're not supposed to do that. And then, oh, we're not curious about that anymore. So going on the problem solving holiday really helped me. And it helped me because I noticed when it bugged me, when people went on, what did you call it, Cynthia? Helping
harder.
Helping harder. Yeah, I can't stand it when people are helping. I got to write that down. Helping harder. And so think of a moment where you've been personally very upset, and you've been really worried about something, and it's very overwhelming, and you're feeling strong emotion, right? And so you're sitting there, you're alone, you're worried, you're afraid, you're very, 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 very overwhelmed. And someone who you trust comes in and sits down beside you. What do you want from that person? Do you want, oh my God, you should do this. Oh, I can't believe she said that. That's so wrong, right? Usually we don't want problem solving in that moment. Yeah.
We just want to be heard. We just want somebody to listen to us. We just want to vent.
Yeah, we want to be accepted for being in this moment, and we don't want someone jumping straight, or some of us will say, I just want a hug, right? And the other person, stop trying to fix it. So this happens in our everyday life. It happens in our insight helps us with this, people. What happens with if you look at the theories and principles and skills that we're learning from the insight approach, it helps us. It gives us a way to be productively curious. It gives us a way to stop assuming, be productively curious, and in the face of resisting behavior, which is defending behavior, which is conflict behavior, we can be curious about what's the threat that's causing the behavior. We can be curious about what's the threat that's causing the behavior, because go back to that moment again where you're feeling overwhelmed and you really, really don't know what's going on. Those of us who are trained in negotiation theory and the interest-based approach might think that we need to find out what matters, right? People would say, so think of it. When you're overwhelmed like that, do you want someone to say, so what's important to you? Like, that's not the time to ask about cares or values or interests, not that moment. And so I began to notice that when I went to problem solving too quickly with my clients, because of course, FYI, that problem solving vacation I took, it was just in my personal life. I was problem solving like hell at work. Don't worry. It wasn't a clean break at all. But I did start to notice that when clients resisted me and I told them, gave them information or an answer, or persuaded them or reassured them, or whatever I was doing, or asked what matters or what's important to them in those moments, they resisted harder. So it was a great lesson for me, because I started with curiosity. So I had this, like, I was primed to begin to understand why it works, but I didn't know why it worked. So what I like to talk to people who are really steeped now in the insight approach, as you all are at various stages of your understanding and development of insight, is really to give you my experience, which was to start with curiosity and to begin to notice. To me, the noticing was the key. And the exercises that I've been doing myself, and increasingly with groups who are, particularly our divorce professionals, are eating up the whole insight approach, because the conflict that we see is like what Ken sees in a child protection mediation. It's primal fear coming out, that everything that they believed in around what life meant in having children and raising them is gone asunder. And the threats that are there are so strong. But that's not just in our world, it's in your world too, right? It's in, and I'm happy for you to jump in and share whenever you have that, because you're dealing with people in distress. Can you think of examples, and please share them, of where your efforts to help were resisted?
I always think an excellent place to use insight is with my mother, because like there's like conflict, and she likes to complain to me about my dad, and you run into all kinds of like weird things with my mother. I'm sure you all have strange mothers too. And so I've like, after I did a lot of the insight training, I would always kind of try to like sneak it in on conversations with her. And I find like it helps her feel more heard, and maybe like she calls me more, and like maybe our relationship is better now, less like conflicts, because she doesn't want to hear like, just tell your dad to throw out his junk or make him clean or whatever like she's yapping about. But if you're like, it sounds like you're, it sounds like you're really stressed out by, and like I find that really it helps facilitate the convo. And so like I use the insight on my mom.
Yeah, and so the powerful parts of it are when we get that resistance. So one powerful tool that isn't just that we all is, if we listen to understand, people calm down. And that's what you're experiencing, right, Kanata? she is calming and she's feeling this connection, and it's making things better for you, even though sometimes you may just be using the skill because you really just want to make it easier. But remember that. So it goes back to this pattern. So thank you for that example. So we get resistance from someone, client, coworker, friend, intimate partner. If in that moment we listen to understand and are truly curious, that person's going to feel heard and understood. Their defending conflictual behavior will usually calm. And so that helps. And then we're not actually in the pattern anymore. So listening to understand can also avert, like can manage the conflict behaviors if we're authentic. If we fake it, how do you think that goes? I mean, some people, you could get away with it perhaps, but if we're not truly curious, people will just think we're playing them. What I love about the insight approach is that it makes it available for us just to be ourselves, but to be curious about the threat that's causing the conflict behavior. So if it's, I'd like to just share the slides because I think this group I want to break down the pieces that get in the way of curiosity based on what many of us were taught. Okay, just wait. Oops, that's not what I wanted, sorry. Close your eyes, you're going to get sick. I'm going to flip through. Okay. So first of all, I would strongly encourage you, if you haven't yet, to go to the Revista Mediación journals. If you haven't read it, Megan Price's article there, it's profoundly changed the way I teach and use curiosity. But essentially, all the research says that the benefit of curiosity is that if I show Cynthia authentic and real, like if I'm truly curious about you, Cynthia, you will experience satisfaction, security, and tension relief. Okay, that will just happen if you experience me to be honestly and authentically interested in you. And we know that the not so fun fact is that when people are feeling threatened, they're experiencing anxiety, fear, and stress. And their cognitive ability is affected. They can't think through to the next step. Their limbic response is going to be to fight, flee, or fawn, or the other threat responses. But remember that when people are experiencing this kind of a threat, they're not listening to you or me. So if curiosity, as demonstrated to Cynthia, if she can experience it because I'm demonstrating it authentically, listening to understand, then as she calms, she can have a better ability to make some decisions about how she's going to act or work through this. The other fun fact that you'll get from Megan's article is that the benefit of curiosity comes to the giver and the receiver. So not only does Cynthia experience the satisfaction, security, and tension relief, but I do. And so there's your motivation to be curious, because it actually helps you. And in fact, I find, because people who are feeling very threatened and are really engaged in conflict behaviors and defending, they don't always get that I'm actually listening to understand initially. Like it can take a few tries sometimes. But knowing that, just being curious and demonstrating that through asking, acknowledging, doing the work, using the skills that we've been taught in Insight, calms me. So I'm better able to be responsive and less reactive. And so these benefits are beautifully explained in Megan's article. So the benefits of curiosity to the giver and the receiver. And when we pick up on someone's threat and resistance to us, if it causes us to defend, then we're in that pattern. We're in that pattern of defend response, which is so eloquently described in the conflict approach books, in Cheryl's books. So I like to say this, because we all like to blame someone. Whose fault is it anyway that we find it hard to be curious? And so I want you to first look at, for those of you who were trained in the interest-based model, which if we had a longer time, we could find all kinds of times that this works really well. But let's look at it. Let's look at it through the lens of the theories and the principles underneath it. So the key principles of interest-based negotiation is that separate the people from the problem. Focus on interests, not positions. Generate options for mutual gain, win-win, and use an objective criteria to evaluate options. And if you haven't heard the lemon analogy or the orange analogy, it's like if two people are fighting over the only lemon that's left on the entire island, and you let them compete, you know, the outcome will be that one of them will get it, the other one won't, winner, loser, or they'll squeeze so hard that it breaks apart, falls into the cat litter box, and it's lose-lose. But anyway, that's the competitive approach. A compromise approach to the lemon, the only lemon on the island, might be for the parent to walk in when two kids are fighting and just say, give me the lemon, cut it in half here. So you each get half and you're each perhaps mutually unhappy or each equally unhappy. But it's sort of the compromise is always that sort of, well, if you have to, you can compromise. And a truly exploring the needs underneath the lemon. What is it about the lemon that you need? What's important to you about the lemon? Those are interest-based questions. You might find out that one needs the juice and one needs the peel. And you're like, wow, because we talked about what's important about the lemon. There's a win-win-win here. So you can make the lemon cake with the lemon zest, with the peel, and you can make the lemonade. And so that idea in a negotiation model makes a lot of sense when people are struggling over something like a lemon, where there's a resource to be distributed, where there's financial decisions to be made, where there's scheduling challenges, where there's all kinds of things that have to do with substantive interests. But let's look at how they define conflict in this approach. So conflict is defined as a struggle over the incompatibility of what I want or need, what my goal is, with yours. And so we're trained to go to problem solving by plucking out the interests from the demands or the positions and trying to create an inventory of the things that matter so we can maximize win-win for both parties. And the definition of conflict is this, the problem solving focus is that, and it's an individualist social theory. So it assumes that individuals will make rational decisions to maximize outcome. Individualist social theory, as applied to interest-based negotiation, where there's relationships at stake, would basically say the individuals engaged in the conflict will be rational if we can convince them that they should try to maximize the outcome for both. Then they'll make those rational decisions. Otherwise, they're going to stay in their positions. So then, honestly, I'm thinking about a family dispute. And it's so obvious to the professionals engaged that these two people could have the lemon cake and the lemonade. Why don't they just squeeze it, peel it, and get on with it? And so as conflict resolution people, we can be kind of like, oh, so the theory and the principles, I applied this for years and always had to work around it because in moments of conflict or strong emotion, the people are the problem. Like, I'm sorry, in many of the work that we do, it's the relationship is part of the problem. And so to separate the people from the problem, I don't know, I've never found that works. Focusing on interests, not positions, fabulous. That works when people are cognitively able to, make a rational decision to shift from position to interest. Mutual gain, win-win outcomes, absolutely. When we've got clients who are ready for win-win, we can get there using this approach. The objective criteria to evaluate options, I never thought really made any sense because in my experience with our work, it's so subjective. I mean, people are making decisions based on a very subjective criteria. The law may pretend to be objective, but the individual decisions that our clients are making in a negotiation tends to be very subjective. So I'm like, that doesn't work. And then the whole idea of the definition of conflict, I'm like, that does show up certainly when we're exploring options or dealing with substantive interests, things that have to do with scheduling and budgets and location and things like that. But we all know that so much of the conflict that we experience as individuals or as professionals intervening seems deeply personal. And there's a lot of behaviors that get in the way of this win-win discussion. And so let's break it down a little bit to look at a comparison. So economics, there's two kinds of economists, but Dan Ariely is a behavioral economist. So he actually is quite interesting to listen to or read, but he studies people's behavior to figure out why people make bad money decisions. And the comparison of a standard economist makes assumptions that people are rational, that they act based on or in accordance with reason or logic. People take everything into account and always make the rational decision. So our basic standard economists are using these assumptions in trying to build theory, what we should do or making decisions. Whereas behavioral economists don't make assumptions. Dan Ariely says, just watch what people do and you'll see that people often do not actually make rational economic decisions. That's very emotional. There's a lot of emotion and other influences on people's economic decisions that can't be explained through rationality or logic. And so the question I started asking myself as I began to wade into the insight approach. So jump ahead 5 years from my first experiment with curiosity, I met Cheryl, started reading her book, and started realizing that a lot of what was being described in the insight approach absolutely made sense to my day job. And it made me look hard at our negotiation model and ask the question, so are our clients really making rational decisions based on individual values, which is the interest-based approach? Well, sometimes they are. Well, when are they not? Let's go back to the way we started this gathering. When they're not is when they're triggered, when they're angry, when they're feeling entitled, when they're struggling to even understand what's going on, when they're grief stricken, when they're not quite themselves. And then their behaviors get in the way of our healthy discussions about trading interests and shifting from positions to interests so we can get an agreement that works for everybody. And so win-win, I'm not saying win-win doesn't work, but I'm saying win-win is just part of this whole piece. And so when we look at what has come out of the insight approach to conflict, okay? I mean, others are talking about using insight in all these other fields, but I'm talking about those moments of conflict and my experiences mostly in the family relations realm. So the beautiful thing is that the insight approach to conflict tells us to focus on behaviors to help us understand threats and change the patterns of behaviors. And so the definition here makes sense to what I see in the room when I'm working with people in conflict. And in fact, what I see in the room when I'm got my own conflicts. So conflict emerges when what matters is threatened and I defend. That's why the conversation about what's important or what matters is not the right conversation in those moments of conflict, because I'm already demonstrating through my behavior that I'm feeling threatened. So we want to understand better what's the threat, not what's the care, not what's the value, because that is important, but that is not that's not our focus of our curiosity at those moments of conflict. This helps me. It's way simpler for me to go, oh, that's a conflict behavior. We'll talk about that in a minute. I wonder what's threatened. I don't have to waste my time being curious about a whole bunch of other things. I notice the behavior, noticing is a skill, and I choose an intervention that starts internally. I wonder what's being threatened, and then I make a choice about what to do. But my curiosity goes to the threat. Because otherwise, if I'm defending back, we end up in this pattern, right? I defend, you defend, I defend, you defend, everybody's defending. And so no one's listening and we're not getting anywhere. Now, am I the only person that's experienced that kind of conflict? Do you agree that this happens? Not just in divorce? Yeah. So we see this happening all the time. And the beautiful thing about the insight approach is it says, focus on the threat. Because you can spend a lot of time doing a lot of different things in those moments of conflict. So when we focus on that, our curiosity doesn't go to, it's not like, I wonder whether this has to do with early childhood trauma. And it's not getting curious about your hunch. I wonder if I'm right. Like I always I like to say to lawyers, guys, when I say let's be curious, I don't mean I wonder if I'm right that, and then we add what we think is going on. I mean, really get curious. What is this behavior telling me? It's telling me that something that matters is being threatened, and that person is defending. And if I defend back by telling, reassuring, persuading, doing whatever, if they defend more, I can know that now the threat's even more because I have not acknowledged what's going on. And so these create these defend patterns so that we can understand conflict in this way. If I feel threatened by you, I can't listen to you and I can't learn anything new about you. I am certain you're trying to hurt me. We hear that all the time when people are engaged in conflict behaviors, particularly where there's a relationship. And I'd love to hear from any of you who are working at more the organizational level. I'm not saying that there's no relationship there, but I'd love to hear the examples of where you see this resonating, where no one's listening anymore. And so the insight approach trains us to use interventions that will allow the person who's expressing the threatening, who's the defending behavior, the person who's feeling threatened, can open up their mind to learning something new again, because the insight approach is based on a learning theory. And so if we come to understand conflict as my interpretation of threat to something that matters deeply to me, and if we accept that the experience of threat shuts down our cognitive functioning, so we're not so good at managing anything. And if we know that curiosity comes, brings that ability to help someone else and yourself feel satisfaction and tension relief, then the whole idea, our goal as the intervener, is to help the other person learn something new. But I can't learn when I have to defend. I can't learn, but my ability to learn can be re-engaged when I no longer have to defend. So our interventions and insight are focused on opening up the pathway to learning. And so with this graph, down here at the bottom in the blue, this is where we make meaning of our world. This is where it all happens. So I interpret something, Catherine experiences the same thing and interprets it in a slightly or largely different way. Same with Elena, and all of us we're all going to experience something and we might make a different meaning about it. Okay, but this is where all the action happens in terms of how we come to know something. We make an assumption, or we develop, or we make meaning of something based on our interpretation of the data, of the experience of what's said, done, not said, whatever that is. And so we know that if down here, I interpret something that's threatening to something that matters deeply, or even not even so much, I might defend against something that doesn't matter very much, but my behavior won't be as heightened. But if I interpret threat down here, I'm going to begin to defend against it. Yeah, but, well, that's not right. Or how do you know? Or I can show you, and I'm going to bring out all the evidence to support why I'm right. So remember, conflict behaviors are those interrupting, yeah, but, body language shut down, leaning in, defending, persuading, justifying, right? There's a wonderful list of defending behaviors that we can gather so that you can focus your curiosity when you see those behaviors, not on, I wonder what matters to that person. And instead it's, I wonder what's being threatened. It's a very different focus. So naturally, if we can clear up interpretation and assumptions and make the accurate understanding of the meaning, we might not actually have a threat. Nonetheless, if the interpretation is of threat, there's a defend response, and if I defend back, we have conflict. So we see this all the time ourselves, and primarily as well when we're working with other human beings who are engaging in conflict that they might call problem solving. When the behavior ramps up and it's to the point that it's justifying, yeah, but interrupting, not listening, it's basically your classic argument. But of course, there's quiet ways to defend too. So I don't want to forget shutting down, turning away, refusing to participate. Okay. And so the insight approach, the interventions that we're all wanting to learn and apply are how do we help clear up any misinterpretation or misunderstanding and allow people to learn something new so that they can have an accurate or new interpretation of what's going on, so that they can shift and change the response to one another and therefore engage in the kind of dialogue that's productive. And so in a listening to understand choice, so you might make the choice, first I'm gonna use a listening to understand response by asking a curious question or acknowledging and then bridging to a curious question, because I really want to understand you. And when we calm and demonstrate that to people, they usually calm down. Not always. And when they don't, like they're defending against something even stronger than we thought. But this is the graph that shows what it is that we're trying to do when we're trying to practice insight. We want to make sure that any misinterpretation or inaccurate assumptions or anything that I make meaning of down here that causes me to defend, sometimes big, sometimes small, we want to make sure that we can use our interventions to clear that up so that we can help people engage better cognitive functions because they're no longer having to defend. They can begin to learn something new. And so this is why when you're reading the insight stuff or practicing it, you have those moments where you go, oh my God, I get it. Have you had those aha moments? Or you hear someone say, that's not what I meant, because they finally understand that you've been interpreting me in a way that I didn't intend. So I get a chance to clear it up when I say, when I finally know, that's what you thought I meant. Oh my goodness. Then I have a chance to, if I'm authentic and really want to clear it up, I get to explain again. And if the other person defends and says, well, yeah, I don't believe you because you always lie. I mean, it is not a magic wand, but it's almost a magic wand when we can actually penetrate the defensiveness through authentic listening to understand, being curious about the threat. And so one last slide, I think, is only to say so the loop, I think there's an upcoming session that's going to be talking about the insight loop, the figure 8. Yeah. So this is a simpler version that I like to use at this stage, because you probably know this, but it's like we make meaning from experiencing something, we come to an understanding of it. And then we need to verify if it's accurate. We need to, check out our interpretation, spend time really coming to an understanding of whether it really is, and then making a decision as to how we're going to act or do, or whether we even care about it. So with the loop, we then go up, and then there's the action's broken down into more dimensions. But I want to give you this example because I think it helps us understand the conflict behaviors. What tends to happen is I experience something, I come to understand that you're just out there to ruin my life, and I'm going to go straight to action. I'm so certain that you're here to ruin my life that I'm going to walk out the door, or I'm going to argue back. And we continue perpetuating this loop of misinterpretation and misunderstandings. And so the extra step is sort of, kind of, what is it? Oh, it's that. Is it? Before we decide to act. And this is happening at the synapse level all the time, but fundamentally it's also about, we have time to slow things down to see if our understanding of something is accurate. Is it so? But when we're feeling threatened, we're going to jump straight to act and we're going to run away. You're not going to wait to see if that's a grizzly bear or just like a puppet. You're just going to probably, I don't know if you run with grizzly bears. Anyone remember? The BC people would know.
No, you don't run.
Okay, so you're going to make the decision. You're going to quickly decide not to run, even though you're not sure if it's a grizzly bear, right? So there's reasons why sometimes you don't take the time to verify, but generally speaking, where we're falling into trouble in our own interpersonal relations or as interveners is that our clients aren't taking time to understand. They are certain that they know that you're just out to get me, or to ruin my livelihood, or to take my land, or to put me in an oppressive situation. So there's all of these things that happen to ourselves and our clients. And so, you all know this. Yeah. So, but I like this slide, and honestly, for new learners of insight, we do an exercise where people basically have an argument, and then someone observes it and just makes note of which behaviors you see. And then when we come back to debrief the exercise, it's very difficult for people to simply describe a behavior without attributing a motive or a story to it. And so it really is important in the insight approach, if you can get good at noticing conflict behaviors, and then if you can quickly be curious, I wonder what the threat is, instead of figuring out what it is without asking. And then you'll get way more comfortable with the skills that come along with it that are like these. Notice the defending behavior and explore with genuine questions about what you notice, bridging, curious questions. Listen to the listener. Is that listening to understand, but also listening? Cheryl uses this term, noticing the other party. So Cynthia is speaking and I'm listening to Cynthia, listening to understand, but I want to also be listening to Elena, who might be there, because I want to see how the other person is responding. So that a big part of our work is to help people verify that their interpretation is accurate. And so another piece that I love to, I don't know, sometimes I think we come to these workshops to find little tips because we're working so hard to get insight, that I find that one of the things that I like is to say, what's my role? What's my role in this moment? So this goes back to even what Ken was talking about earlier. What's my role in this moment? And if my role is to make sure that Kim understands what Jennifer means when Jennifer says this, it changes all our choices of how we intervene. It does. If I see my role as helping Kim and Jennifer problem solve, the interest-based negotiation model is going to make a lot of sense to me because it's such a problem-solving model. And when it fails to work, if you've got nothing, because you've got no understanding of conflict dynamics and threats, then we don't have as much to work with except to call a communication guideline and say, well, we said we wouldn't use blaming language and we wouldn't do this and that. Whereas instead, you get curious, well, what's the threat that's causing that behavior to keep coming up? This is your internal thinking, although you could try it out loud, see if it leads to peace and understanding. But you're basically thinking, what's going on here? But not, I wonder if I'm right that this is going on here. And so this default to problem solving can get in the way when people are ramped up, their emotions are high, and they're feeling threatened. And so all I wanted to talk about tonight was really that I think that the biggest thing I have learned in terms of synthesis of after 6 years of really killing myself trying to get this stuff is that my role is to make sure that what you say, what you mean is understood by me or the other person the way you intended. And that you understand what she's saying the way she intended. And that interpretation and verification loop that you really, I haven't seen it in any other conflict resolution approach. Maybe it's there, is one of the vital things to focus on after you get noticing, after you understand noticing, and after you understand that we want to be curious about the threat to the care. The cares they'll emerge because conversation alone will help us find out what matters and what are the values that are informing certain decisions. But in those moments of conflict with conflict behaviors, we gotta get curious about the threats. And sometimes the threat is real and we gotta manage it. And sometimes it's based on a misinterpretation. And so you have to think, how often have you heard someone say, or you've said it yourself, that's not what I meant. And we don't even know how much more often that would be said if we verified that my interpretation of what Catherine said is accurately what Catherine wanted me to understand in what she said. So I started with curiosity, which was then helped by the productive focus of threat when I began to look at insight. My default to problem solving is still there, but it is interesting how I'm even more annoyed now when other people go to problem solving with me. So, at least there's that. And I like to help our community by saying, and there's, a lot of times we've been hired as problem solvers. And so we have to get to that. It's just that when you think about the bumps on the road, the potholes that get in the way, it's in our line of work, it's usually the people, the conflict behaviors, the misunderstandings, the righteous indignation, the entitlements, the grief, the loss, the sense of betrayal, the resentment, the anger, the fear, all of those emotions that are human anyway, because we're silly enough to choose to work in situations where people just don't always agree to get along. We're kind of stuck with it. And I want to offer only my insight, which is that I have found that curiosity is the first step and it's aided. You can't be curious without noticing when you're judging or assuming. So they go together. And what's your role? What's your role? And begin to notice when problem solving irks you, when you're annoyed, because you don't feel heard or understood before they go to problem solving. And so that's all I've got for tonight, because you're all at various levels of understanding of insight and how you're applying this and using this. And I'd just love to hear your thoughts on all of it or some of it, because we got a few minutes left, I think. Yeah, we do. Yeah. Yeah, so thoughts. You can just unmute, just us.
I thought that was helpful, one more time, you can hear the same thing over and over again, but you get the next little piece, or you get the connection, or you get the reminder that you've forgotten. And so, I certainly appreciate the time that you spent with us, and it was good. I liked the chart, that one chart that you did with the assumptions and then going up to conflict and then coming back and going up to understanding, or whatever was the top there.
Oh yeah. Well, and that's actually that's Cheryl's graph. So and if in the Insight Training Network, when you get in there, you'll see it. Yeah, you can have it. It's in the gray version. It's an older version, is in Practicing Insight Mediation, but I like that one because it's colorful and you really can follow it. So I can share it somewhere if you're not. Others in you that's relevant to your work or your personal life, if you want. This whole idea of noticing and being curious and where our focus should go. Is it helpful? Does it ring true?
Yes, I found it very helpful. Thank you, Jacinta. As a different sequencing of ideas from Cheryl's book. I mean, it's similar ideas, but it's put together out of your experience of how the client is when they come in, and how you can begin to help them to experience the change and the shift by using the insight model. Thank you. Yeah, I hope it'll be interesting to see, Catherine, how you're all applying it within the sort of the therapeutic world with the projects that you're doing in Ireland. So yeah, I had to break it down into a couple of simple things to begin with.
Yeah, thanks, Jacinta. That was a lovely overview. Really appreciate it.
Well, Ken, and the other thing that I like to say to people who are, do you realize that lawyers are the only people that have the expression non-lawyers? Like there's no such thing as a non-social worker or a non-bus driver. So we use this term non-lawyers, right? So non-lawyers, you know, when you start to look at lawyer behavior, it's pretty much all conflict behavior. Debating, it's, you know, submitting, pushing, making it be. And so we have layers and layers and layers of vulnerability and threat in there, Ken, that you might find it hard to be bothered with now, but believe me, there's sad human beings in there.
Well, I've heard several lawyers introduce themselves to me as a recovering lawyer.
Yeah. 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 And yet, you know, there's a really important role that we can play. And that's why people like Kim and Kanata and I are doing collaborative work, because we can't stand the system that pits people against one another. But it's the same. I mean, Cynthia, I think of the environmentalist movement, the whole movement around Indigenous rights. And there are some fights that actually need a system that need like advocacy. And it's as sad as you think. I think the question here will be, how can we use insight and curiosity to understand threats that are causing the defending behavior by the system or by the politicians or by the community, right? Because otherwise, all we're doing is we're simply labeling and polarizing the same thing. I don't know.
I'm wondering. I've tried using the lemon or the orange analogy before to other people, and I wonder how would you say insight explains that scenario? Like, what would happen to the orange?
You know
from
what?
an insight perspective.
The insight perspective would say it's not about the orange.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, right? So it's when it's about the orange, the problem solving approach can make sense. What do you need in the orange? How many oranges are there? Do you need the seeds, the juice, or the pulp? So the problem solving approach, when it's about the orange, it's usually not about the orange. When the behaviors get so escalated that people are not listening to one another anymore, it's about something else. And this is where I'm going to try and think of a quick example. This is where the second level cares. So the individual cares would be interests. I need the peel, I need the seeds, I need the juice, right? Whatever. I mean, and if you can find three people that need three different things, there's win-win-win all around. The problem is that works when it is about the orange. The allocation of the resource that's called the orange can lead to, if you use a rational, individualist, social theory, interest-based approach, can be a great problem-solving approach. But what if the orange represents to me the centuries that my family has farmed this land, and these are the last seeds that are left, and you're trying to take the last orange on the island, and I'm like, you're like devastating my family legacy, and everything is at a higher level of values to me, because it's not just about the orange, it's about what the orange means to who I am, to my identity, to how I promised my grandfather and grandmother on their dying days that I would preserve this thing forever. So you see, it's at that higher level of care, higher level of value, that we see the conflict behaviors getting way more extreme. And so that is the problem with the analogy. And what I really think is the simplest thing to say is, it's not about the orange. And divorced people can talk that way, because we'll say it's not about the house. You know, oh, it's not about the car. It's not about the china. It's not about the cottage. Because when it is about that, there's a problem-solving approach that works. It works to just use interests and explore them. What do you think, Cynthia?
I guess, yeah, no, I think in my work, it's hard to explain to people that it's not about the orange, because they just think it's about the orange. And if we can just, you know, and I think that connection between noticing that really escalated conflict behavior, like if it was just about the orange, would you really be, you know, doing this or saying this or doing that? I think that was just a really important connection.
And so and so now when you go back and look at threat-based questions, you'll have a better way to go, what are you worried would happen if she took the orange and and left for Australia. You know, because asking about the threat is something we are often terrified to do in those moments because people are so heightened. So you don't immediately go straight to the question about the threat, though you might, right? If it's a one-on-one with Jennifer and me and we've got rapport and I can go straight to the threat, there might need to be a listening response that's very curious and listening to understand, to really get the story of the orange. And then once I feel heard and understood that you get me, I can work with you. But I've been in the advocate, you know, the activist side, and you don't feel like they're listening to understand. So how can we? Because nobody's listening to me. Why? How can I listen to them? And all I'm going to say is it just seems to work better. It just does. Ask about the threat, but find canny ways to do it. Just in case any of you are interested, and I don't really. So I think that there needs to be an activist and insight thing, because it's kind of like lawyers, we're struggling with the whole advocacy piece within the context of conflict that our colleagues often think we should be solving, not talking about. And so as I think out loud here, Cynthia, I think there's some connection to the challenge we all have, where we're working with people who are exhibiting conflict behaviors, which tells us, if we buy the insight conflict theory, that they're engaging in these conflict behaviors because they're defending against a threat to something that matters. And for politicians, it can be, I'm afraid I won't get reelected. I'll be humiliated. I won't, my community will reject me. I'll make a bad decision and I'll wreck the world. I mean, I don't like, there's so many ways to look with curiosity at someone's conflict behaviors, that the minute we lose our curiosity, we begin to assume, oh, you just want power and control. You just don't want to give up your Rolls Royce. Like, we make these assumptions about people, and they might be true or they might not be. And that's
It makes me want to just have a real conversation just with Cynthia to hear all about what she really experiences. It makes me want to have a real conversation with Kenneth to really understand those people that he's working with, and you know, and what you were talking about, Catherine in Ireland. It makes me want to have a conversation with each one of you to learn more about what you're doing, so that you can kind of, you know, have a greater example of walking away from, you know, it's about the lemon, and then it's not about the lemon, because it's about something emotional about the lemon, right? I mean, it's the emotional underpinning. You know, anytime people are in conflict, it's because the emotional piece is there, and they can't, you know, they either can't see it or they can't unravel it or whatever, right? So it makes you want to spend time with each one of us to learn more about what that is.
which is really
With our curiosity, right?
Yeah, and to be what I say is, this is more efficient. It's actually way more efficient to notice the conflict behaviors, get curious about the threat that must be there, and make a choice for a few interventions that are focused on understanding that threat. Because you're right, Kim, the clients, the people in the conflict, they're not thinking to themselves, my very identity as a strong and competent lawyer is being challenged and threatened right now. Like, we're not conscious of that. We're just reacting. So our job is to be focused and curious about the threat rather than everything else. Not everything. And I'm curious to know how, with Insight Collaborations International now, so EC, how we can grow this community so we can do more of the chatting. Like, our dream is that we have a few of these, right? Always. Some presentations where it's just like a lecture, and some chances for just chatting, because what I find about Insight practitioners is that we're very earnest and we really care about this, and it's really hard to practice on your own, you know, without getting feedback from someone else, because others aren't thinking this way. They're going to problem solving. But I can tell you that I use Insight all the time, every day, always. And I'm still struggling to master it, but it sure has made when people say you're different, I'm not so feisty and scrappy.
Can I add something, Jacinta? I really do agree that it is a lot more efficient, and it's actually easier to on the facilitator once you get your head around the hard work of getting the hang of it. But I just wanted to go back to the lemon for a second, if I may. I think the whole lemon analogy is about a pie, a very limited pie, where how can the resources be divided up differently? Whereas I think that in insight, it's about getting to the threats. And once you can do that, and if they can be removed, you find that you can have multiple cares existing without the threats.
Yeah,
That is
yeah.
taking it into the levels of the values, as I'm
Yeah.
sure you can see within a learning model, so that it's a different mindset completely.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, so Catherine, you're saying kind of like the cares replace the whole lemon in a way, right? That you then, I mean, you don't worrying about the slices of the pie because now an infinite amount of cares can be addressed and
As long as the threats to those
has
cares
disappeared.
have been diffused, I would say. But it's also bigger than that, in as much as the pie is a limited and individualistic approach, like through interests,
Yeah.
my interest, your interest. If our interests can be sorted out so that we can both get something out of the one lemon, that's fine. But a lot of the time you can't get that. But once you start moving into threats and into how multiple cares can exist, you're talking about moving to relational values where people will surrender some of the stuff that is not quite as important as the relational stuff from which they gain more, for which the fixed pie is not necessary. It's the value that's more important.
Yeah.
And they will be able to make that step if the threat can be removed through, as Jacinta was saying, through exploration of interpretations and intentionalities.
Yeah, and it really can, I think it can be very simplified if you think about what your role is. But yeah, we see this happen all the time. Someone will say, okay, I'll accept this because I'm getting this. And consciously, at the end of the day, they might explain, I'm accepting less child support so that I can get a really great co-parenting relationship, because I do think that, honestly, I don't need that much, but it's more important to me that I have a great co-parenting relationship. And I know that if I accept the full amount of child support, my co-parent's not going to have as much money to budget for vacation. I don't know, but it explains it. And so it's that the lower level of care is the individual one. It's about the pie. By the end of a case or a file or a conflict where you've had the chance to explore interpretation and get people to understand each other the way they are and in their shifting, then there might not even be a conversation about a pie at all. Like suddenly there might not even be a problem to solve. Sometimes the intervention is enough to help clear up misunderstandings, and they're off to the races, and they call you next week and say, we got it sorted out. So it's like making room for that, but we can be very effective using this. And I really want that message to get out there and to say, if you try to do everything at once, it's really hard. And if you're already really experienced, then this will seem very basic, but I do start with curiosity, which requires the noticing. Notice a conflict behavior, make your list, and don't forget about the ones that you wouldn't think of, like reassuring. Sometimes when someone defends against your reassuring, it's them saying, you don't understand how hard this is for me. When we say, don't worry, we'll help. Because we haven't spent enough time listening to really understand. So every time you see those resisting, defending, justifying, persuading, interrupting, or head pats behaviors, start to notice the behavior. Don't impute a motive to it. Notice the behavior and go, shit, what am I supposed to be curious? Oh yeah, I wonder what the threat is. And just slowly, it'll just start to come. And then everything else will make sense. Or not. But I mean, we've got to start somewhere. So help us build this community. Let's, Kim, I'm so glad that you and Lee have joined. There's so many Ontario family professionals, Canada, that that know Insight, invite them to EC. And what I love about it, and many of you have already experienced, you know, there's theater folk doing it. It's leadership, policing, peace building. There's just so many ways that we can apply this because it all makes sense. It's all about human beings on this journey of just trying to understand one another a little better. And so with that, I wish you all health and happiness and see you around. And if you want to learn more in the way that I'm doing this, just know that I'm doing learning groups. So there's one coming up in June, but there's a learning group that I'm leading every couple of months. Mostly it's divorce professionals, but we're getting other people joining as well. So please feel welcome to reach out to me if you want to know more about that and share your own, the things that you're offering to bringing insight to your community or to the world, because we really want to hear from everybody. We want EC to be a collaboration, truly, not just a few of the founding members like me, like spouting off on a webinar.
So what does EC stand for? I missed that.
Insight Collaborations International.
Oh, I see. ICI pronounced EC.
Oh, sorry, yes, because, well,
Oh, okay, I got you.
we
All right,
decided,
thank you.
the Canadians decided it would have to be pronounced EC, yeah.
Okay, I got you.
I know, thank you. But Insight Collaborations, plural, we made it plural because there's so many different ways to collaborate and people collaborating. So we're really hoping it's going to become expanded. So any of your friends that are Insight enthusiasts, get them to join and we can grow this community.
Okay,
All right.
thanks again.
Take care,
Take care.
everybody. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Take care.